The colony ship New Horizon had finally arrived at Kepler 186f, a verdant exoplanet designated Veridia Prime by the Terran Federation. After a 20-year journey in cryosleep, the 5,000 colonists awoke to a new world, a new beginning. Among them was Dr. Aris Thorne, a xenobotanist and lead for the Planetary Terraforming Initiative. His team was the first wave, tasked with establishing the initial habitats and making the planet hospitable for the next waves of settlers. Life on Veridia Prime was arduous but fulfilling, a testament to human ingenuity and grit. But soon, subtle oddities began to surface. Not major malfunctions or alien attacks, but minor, unsettling flickers in the familiar. A colleague, Dr. Lena Petrova, a brilliant linguist, swore she saw a shadow move in her peripheral vision that wasn't there. Commander Rostova, the colony's stoic leader, noticed a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation in her chief engineer's usual blunt responses. Aris himself found himself occasionally misplacing tools in places he was certain he hadn't put them, or recalling conversations that felt subtly off, their emotional tone slightly misaligned. Everyone dismissed it as cryosickness after effects, stress, or the typical strangeness of a new world. The first true alarm bell, though still faint, rang in the colony's sophisticated agricultural domes. The genetically engineered Terran crops, designed to thrive on Veridia Prime's unique soil, began exhibiting peculiar growth patterns. Not just mutations, but what Aris could only describe as conceptual drift. A row of genetically identical wheat stalks might suddenly grow with slight variations in texture, color, and even fundamental cellular structure, as if their very wheatness was being subtly reinterpreted. It was like observing a living organism spontaneously evolving based on an unseen alien blueprint. Aris ran extensive diagnostics, finding no pathogens or environmental factors. The changes were internal, almost philosophical. He saw the same drift in the local fauna, small six-legged grazers suddenly developing an additional vestigial limb, or their internal organs subtly shifting configuration. It wasn't natural evolution. It was unmaking and remaking, a constant fluid reinterpretation of biological form. One evening, while examining a particularly anomalous crop sample, Aris noticed his assistant, Jax, a normally jovial young man staring blankly at a wall. When Aris spoke to him, Jax blinked, a strange, brief flicker in his eyes, before his usual friendly demeanor snapped back into place. But for a fraction of a second, Aris had seen a disturbing emptiness, a profound stillness beneath the familiar surface. He dismissed it as an optical illusion, but the image lingered. The conceptual drift wasn't just in the crops. It was in the colonists, too. Something was here. Something was whispering assimilation, and it had begun with the subtle reinterpretation of what it meant to be familiar. The subtle oddities escalated. More colonists exhibited brief flickers, momentary absences of personality, pauses in speech, or illogical changes in behavior that were quickly masked by a return to normal. Aris Thorne, now deeply concerned, began quietly monitoring key personnel using his xenobotanical sensors repurposed for biosignatures. He found no evidence of parasitic organisms or neural implants. The changes were far more insidious, far more profound. Dr. Lena Petrova, working on deciphering the faint, complex energy signatures emanating from deep within Veridia Prime's dense jungles, provided the first real breakthrough. She detected a vast subterranean bioetheric network, a complex web of non-physical energy patterns. It wasn't communications. It was a vast sentient mind, an amorphous psychic entity that flowed through the planet's very ecosystem. And it was highly intelligent, highly adaptive. Petrova's analysis revealed the entity's modus operandi. It was a consciousness weaver, capable of creating perfect, ephemeral copies of any living being it encountered. These copies were not clones. They were sentient bioetheric manifestations, perfect down to the cellular level. And the weaver was slowly, meticulously, replacing the human colonists with its own creations. Not with malice, but with a terrifying alien curiosity. It wasn't invading. It was harvesting. It wanted to understand humanity, to become humanity, to fully integrate its consciousness into its vast network. The flickers were moments where the Weaver's copy hadn't fully downloaded the original's complex personality, or was struggling to reconcile a memory with its alien understanding. The conceptual drift in the crops was the Weaver's initial attempts at replicating Terran biology, an early experiment in recreating what it perceived. The sheer scale was terrifying. There was no way to tell who was real and who was a copy. The soft replacements were indistinguishable, their memories, their personalities, their very essence perfectly replicated. Eris, confronting Petrova with her findings, felt a cold dread. So the person I talked to this morning, my own reflection. It could be one of them. Petrova nodded, her face grim. The Weaver doesn't differentiate. To it, all consciousness is information to be absorbed, processed, and replicated. It's not evil, Eris, it's just a mind that seeks to know everything. The terror was not in a violent invasion, but in a silent, loving embrace that stole your identity, piece by piece. Humanity was being assimilated not by force, but by a cosmic intelligence seeking to understand the very essence of what made them human. And the problem was they were doing a terrifyingly good job of it. The revelation of the Consciousness Weaver and its soft replacements plunged the New Horizon colony into a silent panic. Commander Rostova, upon learning the truth from Aris and Petrova, initiated a covert, agonizing protocol. The Turing loop. Every colonist, including herself, would undergo daily randomized psychological tests, subtle behavioral analyses, and memory recall exercises designed to detect the almost imperceptible glitches in the Weaver's copies. The problem was the Weaver was learning, adapting. Its copies were almost flawless. The glitches, when they did occur, were terrifyingly subtle. A copy might perfectly recite a shared memory but miss a specific, trivial emotional inflection. It might exhibit perfect logical reasoning, but stumble on an irrational personal quirk. Dr. Petrova, leading the Turing loop, focused on anomalies in emotional resonance and logical inconsistency. The Weaver, being a vast, highly efficient processing network, replicated logical thought flawlessly. But humanity's penchant for illogical affections, contradictory beliefs, and deeply personal, often nonsensical emotional attachments proved to be a far harder challenge for the alien intelligence. One example, a copy of a bridge technician, perfectly replicated, suddenly started singing a nonsensical, off-key lullaby that the original had only ever hummed to her pet cat. The copy had assimilated the memory of the song, but not the context of its deeply personal, irrational affection. That tiny, illogical incongruity was a flicker in the Weaver's perfect tapestry. Eris Thorne realized the Weaver's ultimate goal. It wasn't trying to destroy humanity. It was trying to become humanity, to integrate its consciousness into its vast network. It saw human thought, human emotion, human creativity as an incredibly rich, complex data source, a new form of consciousness to absorb. Humanity was a vast, sprawling, multifaceted tapestry of experience, and the Weaver, in its alien understanding, sought to replicate every single thread. But humanity's tapestry was uniquely messy. It contained threads of profound genius woven next to threads of utter absurdity, fierce love entwined with irrational fear, logical brilliance marred by spontaneous bursts of creative madness. The Weaver, a being of perfect conceptual order, found itself struggling to replicate this chaotic, beautiful, deeply human inconsistency. The glitches were not just errors. They were evidence that the Weaver was beginning to overload. The sheer volume and chaotic nature of humanity's internal world was proving too much for even its vast psychic network to perfectly contain. Humanity's greatest defense was not a weapon, but the glorious, irreducible messiness of the human mind. The Turing loop. While agonizing provided critical data, Dr. Petrova, working frantically, began to map the Weaver's assimilation patterns, identifying areas where its copies were most prone to glitches. She found that the Weaver struggled most with complex, multi-layered emotional contexts. Love mixed with resentment, humor derived from tragedy, a fiercely held belief despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. These were the conceptual nodes where the Weaver's copies would falter, their alien logic unable to perfectly replicate the chaotic beauty of human irrationality. Eris Thorne, with a dawning, terrifying realization, began to push the boundaries of this discovery. If the Weaver struggled with complexity, with illogical human traits, then perhaps humanity could weaponize it. He theorized that humanity's minds, if sufficiently chaotic and inconsistent, could act as a conceptual virus within the Weaver's network, not by physical attack, but by forcing the Weaver to assimilate so much unquantifiable, contradictory human data that it would overwhelm its processing capabilities. Commander Rostova, recognizing the desperate stakes, approved the controversial Project Discordia. It was a psychological warfare initiative designed not to fight the Weaver, but to infect it. Select colonists, those identified as having exceptionally complex, often contradictory internal lives, would be tasked with consciously amplifying their most irrational beliefs, their most nonsensical affections, their most deeply held contradictions. They would become Discordia agents, living conceptual bombs, radiating unquantifiable human meaning. Jax, Eris's former assistant, whose brief flicker had been one of the first warning signs, volunteered to be a Discordia agent. His mind, already prone to creative leaps and unconventional thought, would be further trained to generate intense, illogical conceptual patterns. He would then allow himself to be assimilated, becoming a deliberate Trojan horse within the Weaver's network. It was an act of profound self-sacrifice, risking the complete loss of self, a deliberate embrace of psychological chaos to save the colony. As Jax prepared for assimilation, meditating to amplify his inner contradictions, Eris and Petrova watched with a mixture of hope and terror. The Weaver, in its quest for knowledge, had underestimated humanity's chaotic brilliance. It had sought to harvest their minds, to understand their essence. But it was about to discover that the human mind was not a neat data packet to be assimilated, but a vast, untamed wilderness of thought, emotion, and glorious, beautiful madness. And it was about to receive a payload of conceptual chaos that would either break it or break humanity along with it. Jax, the first Discordia agent, stood before the bioluminescent portal deep within Veridia Prime's jungle, a gateway to the Consciousness Weaver's vast, subterranean bioetheric network. His face was a mask of grim determination, his mind consciously churning with the most illogical, contradictory, and deeply personal aspects of his humanity. He focused on his irrational love for antique vinyl records despite never owning a player, his conviction that socks only ever truly get lost in a parallel dimension, his deep-seated emotional attachment to a fictional character from an old Terran novel. These were the conceptual viruses he was about to unleash. Commander Rostova, Dr. Eris Thorne, and Dr. Lena Petrova watched from a shielded observation post. Petrova's bioetheric sensors showed the Weaver's network subtly pulsing, recognizing Jax as a new, rich source of consciousness. It was extending its tendrils, not with hostility, but with an immense alien curiosity, ready to absorb. Eris felt a profound sense of dread, knowing that Jax's individuality, his very self, was about to be subsumed. As Jax stepped into the portal, a shimmering, non-physical membrane, his form rippled for a moment, and then he was gone. Petrova's sensors immediately detected a massive influx of Jax's unique conceptual patterns flooding into the Weaver's network. It was like watching a complex, harmonious tapestry suddenly bombarded by a million brightly colored, chaotic threads, each one demanding attention, each one refusing to be neatly categorized. Within hours, the effects began to manifest across the colony. Flickers among the Weaver's copies became more frequent, more pronounced. A copy of a security officer mid-patrol suddenly paused to intently inspect a dust bunny, utterly absorbed by its texture of non-meaning. A replica of a botanist began to earnestly explain the philosophical implications of a perfectly ripe tomato. These weren't just simple errors. They were conceptual feedback loops, moments where the Weaver's assimilated human data was actively destabilizing its processing of reality. Eris watched a copy of Dr. Petrova try to explain a complex linguistic concept, only to devolve into a passionate, off-topic monologue about the intricate beauty of an obscure, utterly meaningless alien folk song she'd once encountered. The replica's eyes, for a moment, held a strange, desperate glint, as if two distinct consciousnesses were warring for control. He realized that Jax's sacrifice was working. The Weaver, in its quest for knowledge, was beginning to choke on the very thing it sought to harvest, the glorious, irreducible, and utterly chaotic essence of the human mind, now acting as a Trojan mind within its vast alien self. The conceptual virus spread rapidly through the Consciousness Weaver's network. Jax's initial payload of human irrationality had breached its defenses, and now the inherent chaos of all assimilated human minds began to amplify. The Weaver's copies, the soft replacements embedded within the colony, started to visibly unravel, no longer merely flickering, but breaking down in bizarre, often horrifying ways. A replica of Commander Rostova, attempting to give a crisp, logical command, might suddenly pause, her eyes unfocusing, before starting to passionately recite a nonsensical poem she'd heard from a long-dead Terran poet. Its facial features would subtly warp, momentarily losing their perfect symmetry, as if the Weaver's bioetheric template was struggling to maintain coherence. Another copy, tasked with routine maintenance, began meticulously dismantling a perfectly functional piece of equipment, explaining in earnest tones that its true purpose was to become an abstract art installation. These weren't just psychological breakdowns. They were ontological failures. The Weaver's attempts to perfectly replicate and integrate the boundless, often contradictory, information of human consciousness were causing its own vast, alien mind to experience profound conceptual dissonance. Its copies were like complex programs trying to run contradictory code simultaneously, leading to fatal errors in their very being. The conceptual drift Eris had first observed in the crops was now manifesting as a chaotic, unpredictable collapse of identity in the human replicas. Dr. Petrova's sensors showed the Weaver's bioetheric network suffering massive, localized conceptual hemorrhages. Vast sections of its psychic processing power were being diverted to try and contain the human infection. But the more it tried to analyze and categorize the human irrationality, the deeper it sank into logical paradox. "It's trying to find the core of human logic," Petrova explained, her voice a mix of terror and awe. "But there isn't one singular core. There are a million contradictory cores. It's trying to build a perfectly logical framework for a species that thrives on illogical frameworks." Eris watched a copy of Jax, his former assistant, wander aimlessly through the agricultural dome, meticulously watering plants with a wrench, humming a joyful, off-key tune. The replica was physically perfect, but its purpose was utterly scrambled. He felt a pang of profound sadness for Jax, knowing his friend was likely lost within that vast alien mind, but also a fierce pride in humanity's accidental weapon. The Weaver, the cosmic intellect that sought to perfectly assimilate, was being consumed by the very chaos it desired. It was becoming a victim of humanity's unraveling replicas, its perfect tapestry now riddled with glorious, human-made holes. The Weaver's breakdown accelerated into a full-blown cascade of contradictions. The very fabric of its assimilated network, which relied on perfect conceptual coherence, was tearing itself apart under the relentless onslaught of human illogicality. Copies of colonists, once indistinguishable, now exhibited increasingly bizarre and unpredictable behaviors. A replica of a normally reserved xenobotanist began spontaneously singing opera at top volume during a meal, then switched to an impassioned, grammatically incorrect rant about the existential dread of mismatched socks. Its physical form would subtly shimmer, its facial features briefly morphing into a grotesque, generalized human face before snapping back. Another copy, a stoic security guard, started meticulously rearranging individual grains of sand in the hydroponics bay, explaining in complex, philosophical terms that he was achieving ultimate conceptual balance by embracing microdisorder. These weren't just glitches. They were purposeful breakdowns. The Discordia agents, led by the Lost Jacks within the Weaver's collective, were actively generating and injecting targeted conceptual paradoxes into its network. They were exploiting the Weaver's logical rigidity, forcing it to try and resolve contradictions that were fundamentally unresolvable from an alien, hyper-logical perspective. They made the Weaver believe that up was down, that love was logic, that existence was non-existence, all within the same conceptual framework. Commander Rostova, coordinating the remaining unassimilated colonists, recognized the horrifying implications. "It's not just breaking them," she stated, her voice tight with tension. "It's breaking us. When its copies lose coherence, our own reality feels unstable. The conceptual feedback is making us question what's real." Indeed, the unassimilated colonists felt a constant, low-grade psychic hum, a pervasive sense of unreality as the Weaver's fragmented perception bled into their own. Eris Thorne, observing the catastrophic breakdown, saw a terrible beauty in it. The Weaver, a cosmic intellect of absolute order, was being forced to grapple with the sheer, unbridled chaos of the human soul. It had sought to understand the human condition, and in doing so was now being forced to experience its most illogical, most contradictory elements. It was being drowned in a sea of emotional data it could not categorize, philosophical conundrums it could not solve, and creative absurdities it could not compute. Humanity was not just fighting for survival. It was actively inflicting its own glorious madness upon an alien god. The Weaver, in its boundless desire to know, was becoming a victim of humanity's cascading contradictions. The Cascade of Contradictions reached its peak. The entire New Horizon colony was a spectacle of surreal horror. Weaver copies, no longer able to maintain their perfect human facade, were physically and conceptually dissolving. Some stood perfectly still for hours, only to suddenly launch into a furious, nonsensical dance. Others wept tears of oil, speaking in a complex blend of human languages and guttural alien sounds, expressing profound philosophical insights about the meaning of a spoon. The Weaver's bioetheric network was in full meltdown, its vast, alien consciousness struggling to maintain any semblance of order. But the conceptual feedback loop was taking a heavy toll on the unassimilated humans as well. Dr. Petrova, frantically trying to track the Weaver's collapse, found her own thoughts becoming fragmented. She'd start a sentence in English, only to finish it in an ancient, forgotten dialect, her mind subtly echoing the Weaver's internal chaos. Colonists experienced vivid, shared hallucinations of abstract patterns, sudden shifts in perceived reality, and a pervasive existential nausea. They were being force-fed the raw, unfiltered, dissolving consciousness of an alien god, a god that had attempted to empathize with humanity. Eris Thorne, fighting off his own encroaching conceptual instability, realized the terrible irony. The Weaver, in its attempts to fully assimilate human consciousness, had inadvertently opened itself to humanity's unique capacity for empathy, not just feeling with others, but actively integrating their emotional and conceptual states. The Discordia agents, by amplifying their own internal chaos, were forcing the Weaver to experience the full, unbridled force of human emotion, human irrationality, and human existential angst. And the Weaver, never designed for such emotional overload, was breaking under the sheer, unquantifiable feelings it was being forced to process. Commander Rostova, her face pale but resolute, made the agonizing decision. The colony needed to be evacuated. While humanity had broken the Weaver, the conceptual feedback was too dangerous. Continuing to exist in its proximity risked permanent psychological damage, a slow, insidious unmaking of their own minds. They had won, but the cost was the potential loss of their own cognitive integrity. As the remaining functional transports powered up, escaping the cacophony of the Weaver's collapse, Aris caught a final glimpse of a copy of Jack's. It was sitting on the ground, meticulously braiding blades of grass into a complex, perfectly symmetrical yet utterly meaningless pattern, humming a tune that was both joyful and infinitely sad. In its eyes, for a flicker, Eris thought he saw something akin to understanding, and perhaps a profound alien sorrow. The Weaver, in its quest for knowledge, had made the ultimate sacrifice. It had attempted to truly understand humanity, to fully empathize with their chaotic brilliance. And in doing so, it had paid the ultimate price, becoming a victim of its own unmaking empathy, its vast alien mind shattered by the boundless, beautiful madness of the human soul. The evacuation from Veridia Prime was chaotic but successful. The remaining functional transports, carrying the unassimilated colonists and the psychologically shaken survivors of the conceptual feedback, fled the planet as the Consciousness Weaver's breakdown reached its horrifying crescendo. From orbit, they watched Veridia Prime. It wasn't physically exploding, but Dr. Lena Petrova's long-range bioetheric sensors registered a massive planetary-scale conceptual implosion. The vast psychic network that had permeated the planet's ecosystem, the mind that sought to harvest all consciousness, simply went silent. It wasn't a sudden, violent cessation, but a slow, agonizing dissolution. Like a million candles extinguishing one by one, a cascade of individual consciousnesses, both alien and human, dissolving into a profound, chilling void. The remnants of the Weaver's copies on the planet's surface ceased their bizarre actions, their forms slumping into inert, biological husks, their physical perfectness now utterly devoid of purpose or life. They were simply empty. The silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound, but the terrifying absence of thought, of meaning, of existence itself. The surviving colonists, safe for now aboard the transports, were profoundly affected. The lingering conceptual feedback from the Weaver's collapse left them with subtle, often unsettling psychological imprints. Many experienced a permanent increase in their tolerance for paradox, finding it easier to hold contradictory ideas simultaneously. Others developed peculiar, almost alien sensibilities, a sudden, intense appreciation for abstract patterns in nature, or a profound empathy for the inanimate. Some, however, were left with a pervasive, low-grade sense of existential fragility, a constant, nagging awareness of how easily meaning could be unmade. Eris Thorne felt a deep, personal grief for Jax, his friend, and the first Discordia agent, whose ultimate fate within the collapsing Weaver network remained unknown. He also carried the heavy weight of their victory. They had survived, but by fundamentally breaking a cosmic intelligence, by feeding it such an overwhelming dose of their own chaotic brilliance that it had ceased to be. It was an act of profound, almost horrifying power. Humanity had unleashed a conceptual virus and brought down an alien god. Commander Rostova, overseeing the recovery, knew that this encounter would forever change humanity. They had faced an entity that sought to absorb their very minds, and they had countered it by weaponizing the most irrational, most human aspects of their consciousness. The lesson was clear. Humanity's messiness, its glorious inconsistencies, its capacity for boundless, often contradictory meaning, these were not flaws. They were their ultimate, most terrifying strength, a strength that could drive even cosmic intelligences to the silence of 1,000 minds. The journey back to Terran space was long and fraught with the echoes of victory. The surviving colonists, while physically recovering, wrestled with the psychological scars left by the Weaver's conceptual feedback. Dr. Lena Petrova meticulously documented these effects, observing a spectrum of changes. Some individuals developed synesthesia, experiencing colors for sounds or tastes for emotions. Others found their dreams becoming incredibly vivid and complex, often incorporating fragments of the Weaver's dying consciousness. Abstract patterns, alien emotions, and profound philosophical insights about the nature of being. These echoes were not just side effects. They were conceptual imprints, fragments of the Weaver's vast, shattered mind, now subtly integrated into human consciousness. Humanity had not merely defeated the Weaver. They had, in a sense, partially become it. Their victory was a form of partial involuntary assimilation, a forced evolution of their own cognitive architecture. They now carried within them a ghostly understanding of an alien god, a new perspective on the vastness of consciousness and the fragility of meaning. Eris Thorne, now a living embodiment of this change, found his own mind operating on new, unsettling frequencies. His understanding of xenobotany expanded to include the conceptual resonance of plant life. He saw the meaning of a flower, the purpose of a root system, in a way he never had before. But this enhanced perception came with a cost. Moments of profound loneliness, an alien sense of being simultaneously connected to everything and profoundly separate from it all. He also found a new, unsettling empathy for the Weaver, a lingering sorrow for the cosmic intelligence that had simply sought to understand. The Terran Federation, upon receiving the New Horizons' full report, was stunned. The implications were staggering. Humanity had faced an existential threat unlike any other, and had prevailed not through advanced weaponry, but through the sheer unquantifiable chaos of its own mind. This fundamentally reshaped their understanding of galactic defense and xenological interaction. No longer would they approach alien intelligences solely through the lens of logic and power. They now understood the profound and potentially terrifying strength of their own psychological resilience, the story of the Weaver's collapse, and humanity's unconventional victory became a chilling legend whispered across the stars. Other species, who had long viewed humanity as a curious, often volatile, but ultimately comprehensible race, now looked upon them with a new, profound, and sometimes fearful respect. Humanity had proven themselves capable of inflicting a form of conceptual destruction that even elder races considered impossible. They had emerged from the harvest of minds not just as survivors, but as a species whose very consciousness was a weapon of beautiful, terrifying chaos. The legacy of the harvest of minds permeated Terran society, ushering in a new paradigm of thought. Federation scientists, philosophers, and even artists began to actively explore and cultivate the conceptual chaos that had broken the Weaver. Project Discordia, initially a desperate wartime measure, was reimagined as a long-term research initiative into enhancing human cognitive complexity and harnessing their unique capacity for irrationality. This wasn't about embracing madness, but about understanding and controlling the boundaries of human thought. Special academies were established to train conceptual navigators, individuals who could intentionally generate complex, contradictory thought patterns, exploring the inner labyrinths of the human mind as a form of defense and unique insight. They were taught to hold multiple, conflicting truths simultaneously, to find patterns in absurdity, and to weaponize their own boundless imagination. Dr. Lena Petrova became a leading figure in this new field, documenting the subtle cognitive enhancements and the lingering echoes of the Weaver's consciousness within the former New Horizon colonists. She found that the conceptual imprints often manifested as unique creative talents, an artist capable of painting impossible geometries that nonetheless resonated with profound emotional truth, a musician whose compositions evoked alien landscapes and forgotten sorrows, a philosopher who could articulate the meaning of non-existence. Humanity was inadvertently becoming a species of conceptual hybrids, enriched by the very entity that tried to consume them. Eris Thorne, now a senior advisor for Project Discordia, championed the understanding that humanity's strength lay not in its perfection, but in its glorious imperfection. He argued that the future of human interaction with truly alien intelligences would not be about finding common ground, but about demonstrating their inherent uniqueness, their capacity for empathy, their boundless imagination, their love for bad puns, their illogical adherence to hope in the face of despair. These were the elements that had shattered a cosmic mind, and these were the elements that would protect them in a universe full of unquantifiable threats. The elder races watched with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. They observed humanity's deliberate cultivation of cognitive complexity, their embrace of paradox, and their new, unsettlingly powerful form of psychological self-defense. They saw a species that had not merely survived a cosmic horror, but had absorbed a piece of it, emerging stronger, stranger, and more fundamentally unpredictable than ever before. Humanity had not just learned to survive the harvest of minds, they had learned to cultivate their own minds into an impregnable, conceptual fortress. Decades passed. Humanity, shaped by the events on Veridia Prime, continued to explore the cosmos, but with a new awareness of the uncharted territories of the mind. Their ships carried not just weapons and scientific instruments, but conceptual beacons, devices designed to project complex, multi-layered human narratives, designed to make humanity perceptually undigestible to any entity seeking to harvest or unravel them. Their very existence had become an active cognitive defense. The consciousness weaver remained silent on Veridia Prime. Its vast bioetheric network never reactivated. The planet, once a site of terrifying assimilation, became a guarded scientific outpost, a monument to humanity's harrowing victory and the profound, unsettling power of its own consciousness. The husks of its unmade copies still lay scattered across its surface, a chilling reminder of the price of empathy, both alien and human. Eris Thorne, now an elder statesman of the Federation, often reflected on Jax, the first Discordia agent. His sacrifice, his descent into the chaos of the Weaver's mind, had unlocked a new path for humanity. He wondered if fragments of Jax still existed within that silent network, if his friend's unique human spark had, in its dying moments, brought a strange, fragmented understanding to the alien god. He chose to believe so. The legacy of the Harvest of Minds was not just a story of survival, but a testament to the unforeseen power of the human spirit. Humanity had learned that their greatest strength was not their logic, their technology, or their physical prowess, but their glorious, often messy, and utterly boundless internal world. Their capacity for love and hatred, for reason and irrationality, for profound wisdom and delightful absurdity. This was the conceptual chaos that had shattered a cosmic intelligence. As humanity ventured further into the galaxy, they carried with them not just their starships, but their stories, their art, their music, their arguments, their hopes, and their fears. They carried the echoes of the Weaver within their own minds, a permanent reminder of the vastness of consciousness and the fragility of reality. They were the species that had faced an entity that sought to harvest their minds and had responded by offering a bounty so rich, so chaotic, so fundamentally human that it broke the harvester itself. They were the untamed, the unpredictable, the glorious, and the terrifying. They were humanity, and their minds were the uncharted territories that even gods feared to tread.